I just finished the Run Rabbit Run 100 miler last weekend. For me, this is my first time ever running over a marathon, so there were a lot of unknowns coming into this, and I know that for me at least, I was constantly researching, trying to find as much information on the race as I could. So hopefully for some of you out there, if you're wanting to run this race, or maybe even if it's your first ultramarathon like it was for me, I can be that source of information for you. So let's jump right into it. So the race starts at the base of the ski hill. One recommendation I have is that if you're wanting to run this thing fast, get towards the front, because as soon as you start, it basically halts down to a walk, and there are a lot of places where it was actually standstill and you were just sitting there waiting to move. Basically, you go through a big series of switchbacks for a while up the hill, and the whole time you're basically in a conga line. There's no passing, you're moving very slow, until eventually you hit a point where you just head straight up the mountain. There's no more switchbacks, and there's a little more space here where you can get around people if you want to. From there, you're going to pass a gondola station, which your family and friends can ride up to and meet you there if you want, but this isn't even a real aid station. It's only like 2 or 3 miles in, so personally I wouldn't recommend spending a ton of time here. And then after you pass the gondola station, you basically follow this old fire road up to the first aid station, which is Mount Werner. This is a very important aid station because it's your first one, and then also it's going to be the last aid station that you're able to access for another 12 miles. This is the longest distance you'll have between aid stations, so make sure you stock up here and you've got plenty of fuel and fluids. I was using a Salomon running vest with soft flasks, and I brought a couple extra that I filled up here, so I had 4 in total, and I'm very glad that I did that. So from Mount Werner, you're heading to Fish Creek Falls. The first half of this is mostly rolling-ish hills with an average decline, I'd say, and it's a great place to actually get some solid running in. From there, as you get closer to Fish Creek Falls, things start to slow down a little bit because the terrain gets a little bit more technical. It's pretty rocky in some places, and there's some big steps and whatnot, and a little bit of exposure, so you have to make sure you're taking your time here a little bit more. Because this is an out and back section of the trail, you're going to be passing people heading the opposite direction as you, and this is also a super common hiking trail in Steamboat, so we were passing a lot of hikers as well. Things slowed down here a lot. It was another conga line for a long time. You weren't able to run these downhills, which was pretty frustrating, but you just keep heading downhill, and eventually you'll pass Fish Creek Falls. You'll follow the trail out into this parking lot and on down the road, and then you'll get to the Fish Creek Falls aid station. One quick thing to say about the aid stations, they are super well stocked. All kinds of fruit, cookies, crackers, pretzels, chips. They had Tailwind at all the stations and water. Then they also had peanut butter and jellies, avocado, quesadillas, pretty much anything and everything you could ever want or need. So personally, I ran the whole race just relying on the aid stations. I didn't bring any of my own fuel or food or anything like that, and I'm glad I did, and I was just fine. Anyways, after you hit that aid station, you're gonna head back the way you came. So you're gonna keep following this back till the trail splits off a new way for you, and you're gonna be heading to Long Lake. Trip from Fish Creek to Long Lake is somewhere around 6 miles, which is nice coming from that big 12-mile distance that we just did. Once you get to Long Lake, you're gonna be heading to Summit Lake next, and this is another great section to get in some solid running and make up some time. It's mostly just dirt roads, and a lot of it's even at a slight decline. So I'd recommend opening things up here, making it to Summit Lake at a decent amount of time. And the Summit Lake aid station is where your drop bag is going to be. You'll be passing this twice. Personally, I never used my drop bag, but I did have one there just in case, with some extra socks, some extra blister care stuff, and things like that. After Summit Lake, you're going to be heading to an aid station called Billy's Rabbit Hole. They called this aid station more of a minimal aid station, but honestly, I thought it was just about the same as all the others. It was fully stocked and had everything I could ever need. Getting there, you're following more dirt roads for the most part, but it does transition into like some single track stuff towards the end. This is all mostly downhill still, which is good. And then after Billy's Rabbit Hole, you've got another big 10-mile stretch as you head to Dry Lake. This is mostly single track through here, but it's all downhill, so it's another great spot to open it up if you can and make up some time. And then once you get to Dry Lake, you're able to pick up a pacer if you'd like as you start your descent into town. So from Dry Lake, you're headed down to Olympian Hall. This is more single track through here, all downhill again, until you get into town at least, and then it flattens out a bit. The course through town was super well marked. They had all of these big blue flashing lights, so it was literally impossible to miss. And then they also had volunteers at all of the crosswalks, pressing the button for you and like stepping out in the traffic and stopping it if need be. So I felt totally safe through here. I know some people are nervous about running through town this late at night, but it was perfectly fine. You'll eventually make it to Olympian Hall. This is the first time I actually met up with my crew. I changed my socks and retaped a couple of my toes and things like that. And then I went inside and actually used an actual restroom and restocked on fluids and food. One thing about the Olympian Hall aid station is that you do not want to spend too much time here. I was talking to a few people throughout the course who had done it before, and they had the same advice. Olympian Hall is where most people drop because you can go inside, you can get warm, your crew and your family are probably there. I would recommend making a point to try and spend as little time here as possible and get moving as quick as possible. So from Olympian Hall, you're going to be heading up the opposite direction of where you were originally, and they call this section the Lane of Pain, and I can understand why, because this section section sucked. It is a lot of very steep climbing. So basically you're gonna do 5 or 6 miles worth of climbing up to an aid station. From there, make sure you're checking in with the volunteers to figure out which direction you need to go, because you're gonna do a loop and then come back into the aid station from a different direction. The loop around the aid station sucked as well. And then once you get back to the aid station for the second time, they gave us all a playing card, I guess just to prove that we had done it twice. And then they'll point you in the right direction to go and you'll start heading downhill back towards Olympian Hall. It's a ton of switchbacks on the way down. It feels like it's never ending, but eventually you'll make it back to Olympian Hall. You'll check in at the timing tent and you'll give them your playing card, although they did not care about the cards at all. And here at Olympian Hall is probably gonna be one of the last times you see your crew, so make sure you grab anything from them that you need. Once again, like I said, I would recommend trying to spend as little time here as possible. I definitely hit a low point here and I probably spent a little bit too much time warming up because it was very hard to get moving again. The race directors also warned everyone that if you are going to drop, that this is probably the last time that you're realistically going to be able to do so, because after this point in time, the aid stations get increasingly more difficult to get to, and so it's going to be much more difficult to get you out of there if you drop at one of these later aid stations. So evaluate your prospects here, but don't spend too much time and try to get moving as quick as possible. So from Olympian, you're going to be heading to Dry Lake, which means that you're basically just going to be retracing your steps. You'll go back through town and then back up the single track that you came down originally. And then you'll eventually hit the Dry Lake aid station. From Dry Lake, you're going to be headed back to Billy's Rabbit Hole, but you're going to be taking a different route than you originally took on the way down. And this route is much more technical. I would consider this the most technical point in the race. There are a lot of like large rock fixtures and stuff like that that you almost have to scramble over. But fortunately, it's all still pretty well marked. They had a bunch of red flags set up where you needed to go, so it was relatively easy to follow. However, this is the first point in time where I really had to kind of look around and make sure that I was heading the right direction a few times. So from Billy's Rabbit Hole, you're headed back to Summit Lake where your drop bag is. It was mostly single track stuff until eventually you hit a dirt road and you follow that the rest of the way to the aid station. And then you're gonna head out towards Long Lake, but you're gonna be taking a different route than the original one that you took coming down. This is mostly single track stuff through here. Again, it's a lot of rolling hills, but I'd say it's definitely net uphill. It felt like it at least. And for me, this is where things really started to get tough and all the fatigue started to really set in. I am struggling. So you'll eventually make it to the Long Lake aid station, and then from there you're going to be headed back to Mount Werner, which is going to be your last aid station. The trek from Long Lake to Mount Werner is much more climbing than I originally anticipated it being, and I definitely moved slower through this section than I thought I would. And so finally you'll make it to Mount Werner, which like I said is going to be your last aid station. And then from there, instead of following the switchbacks down the ski hill like you originally did, you're going to follow a service road down all the way. And for me, this is one of the worst parts of the race. This road is very steep. And by this point in time, my legs were so fatigued that I couldn't actually like run the downhills and make up any real speed. And walking the downhills is just painful. It sucks. So I was hating my life during this like 6-mile descent down the road. But nonetheless, we got it done. You'll eventually hit a point where you're coming back into town. You'll hop on like another little trail that's going to take you all the way to the finish. I will say this last stretch felt a lot longer than I anticipated it being, but eventually you'll get through. I know in years past they'd mentioned that you had to cross through this little stream. They didn't make us do that this year, so I was able to go the entire time without getting my feet wet, which is awesome. And then you'll pass through the finish line and they've got a big party set up essentially with beer and food and anything else you could want. Personally, I was way too tired for that, so we did not stick around. We ended up just heading back to the condo. Overall, I thought that this was a great race and a great course. Everything was really well marked and the course was easy to follow. For the nighttime running, they had all these reflectors set up on the trail, so it was easy to follow with your headlamp. And then during the day, it was honestly just pretty obvious because there weren't a whole lot of different ways you could go. And if you were in doubt, they had flags and markers along the way as well, so it was really easy to follow. Like I mentioned earlier, you can do this entire race without bringing any of your own fuel if you wanted to. That is what I did, and I'm glad I did it that way because it meant I could pack light and I could just grab enough from the aid stations to hold me over until I got to the next one and I was good to go. They also had like Tums and Vaseline and things like that at a lot of the aid stations as well. I did bring some of my own Tylenol and like blister care stuff and things like that, but overall I'd say I probably could have got away with bringing less than what I did. Another important thing to reiterate is, like I said, you can make it through this entire course without getting your feet wet, which is great. There are a few different little stream crossings and things like that, but all of them had spots where you could either just like jump over, or there were like rocks in the middle or a log across moss or something like that where you can make it through without soaking your feet. I definitely wouldn't consider this an easy course by any means, but I think it is absolutely doable for your first 100 miler. Like I said, this was my first 100 and I did it on relatively short notice. I had just like a 6-month buildup leading up to it. Before last week, the longest I'd ever ran is a marathon. So I'd say that if you're considering Run Rabbit Run for your first 100 miler, I think it is a great choice. I'm glad I chose this one. The course is absolutely beautiful. Steamboat is awesome during this time of year. There's tons of support and a great infrastructure behind it. And the time caps are a little bit more lenient than some of the other big mountain races around. Hopefully you took something away from this and you feel a little bit more prepared if you're planning on running this in the future. Let me know in the comments if you have any questions. I'm more than happy to help. Thanks for watching and we'll see you next time.